Hey everybody, Douglas Blair Roberts here, the Super Vader 400 here. It's time for another wrestling review, and this time, this is my long-awaited, long overdue WCW pay-per-view in 2000 and 2001 review. At first, I wanted this video has been in the making for almost, believe it or not, 8 years. 8 years. I wanted to do it back in 2010, but all of the WCW in 2010 did again in 2013, but all of the WCW material got removed from YouTube when WWE did that huge copyright during Linda's Senate campaign. And ever since then I've been trying to go to various other websites, other video sharing websites that have WCW uploaded footage, and finally I found two. The first one was real good. It had a lot of pay-per-views. It had a lot of the pay-per-views and shows that I wanted to see, but something happened with that page. Either that page got hit with a copyright, or the guy just decided to remove all his videos. Then I finally found another Chinese website, which the playlist with all of these pay-per-views I'm going to be talking about on here will be in the description box below for those of you who want to watch these awesome shows, because as of now I don't own the WWE network. Own the WWE network, so I can't watch and review all of the pay-per-views. This whole video will be me going through every WCW pay-per-view from 2000 all the way to 2001. So that will be Sold Out 2000 all the way to Green 2001, which will be the final pay-per-view of WCW. Another reason I wanted to do this video is because I've seen various videos here on YouTube. I've seen various videos here on YouTube just dogging WCW during this time period. I was still a huge WCW watcher during this time period, and several years later as an adult, I still enjoy this and consider this some of the best professional wrestling around. So, like I said, there will be this long 2000s version of WCW. I'll also be doing a WCW 2000 year in review as soon as I finish watching and remembering all the Nitros and Thunders from that year. And I will also be doing individual longer reviews of the WCW 2000 and 2001 pay-per-views. Um, yeah, with that being said, let's get started right now. Hey everybody, the Super Vader 400 here, Douglas Blair Roberts here, back for part 2 of my WCW pay-per-view in 2000 review. This review, like I said in part 1, will cover January, all the way to March of 2001. Yeah, before I start, I don't remember if I mentioned this in part 1, but yeah, the best pay per views. First off, I like every pay per view WCW produced in 2000 and early 2001. But the best pay per views, in my opinion, were Sold Out, Uncensored 2000, Spring Stampede, Slamboree, Bash at the Beach, Great American Bash, Fall Brawl, Halloween Havoc, Mayhem, Sin, Super Brawl Revenge, and the last one, Greed. These were the best pay per views WCW produced in 2000 and 2001, in my opinion. And first, we're going to start off with January through March of 2000 with Sold Out, Super Brawl, and Uncensored 2000. Like I said, Sold Out and Uncensored were, my opinion, the best. But I love all three. Let's start off with Sold Out 2000. But before I get to the pay-per-view reviews, I'm also going to talk about the time period this was. This was early 2000, which means this was right after in late 99 when Jeff Jarrett, Bret Hart, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and later Scott Steiner, they swerved everyone and reformed the newest incarnation of the NWO 2000 with Ron and Don, the Harris brothers, as security for this team. And around this time, before he left, this had Chris Benoit, Chris Benoit, Piper, Terry Funk, Terry Funk, and Sting and Hulk Hogan as of course as and Goldberg before his injury, and Sting, who just came back from his injury, as top baby faces. Top baby faces. Other feuds during this time period were the second breakup of Harlem Heat when Stevie Ray turned on Booker T and his partner Midnight and got Big T, Ahmed Johnson from WWE, Clarence Manson from WWE, and formed the newest incarnation of Harlem Heat, Harlem Heat 2000. Harlem Harlem Heat 2000. Him and Booker T for the first half of 2000 feuded over of ownership of the Harlem Heat name and franchise, which this is where Booker T started. This is where Booker T started wearing the speedos, started wearing the black, sometimes white speedos over the flaming tights. I always loved this storyline. This storyline is widely considered embarrassing for Booker T, but I always loved this storyline because this storyline, in my opinion, um, molded him into the champion he would become later that year, and the champion and legend he is today. He is today, and the whole storyline was so goddamn funny. But I'll talk about that in another video. So with that being said, let's get started right now. The very first pay-per-view, Sold Out 2000. In my opinion, one of the best pay-per-views WCW has ever produced. So many awesome matches. Every match was awesome. Even the terrible lackluster matches. There was not a terrible lackluster match, but there were let's see, one, two, and three matches that could have been left off of this card or on the pre-show or taking place on television. But one thing I did like about WCW, WCW and other promotions like WCW, they always tried to get every wrestler they had on the pay-per-view. The best matches were the Triple Threat Theater, which featured Billy Kidman wrestling Malenko Saturn and The Wall in three consecutive matches. back to back, with the first being a catch as can wrestling match with Malenko, the second being a bunkhouse brawl match with Saturn, and the third being a cage match, a cage heat match with the Wall, with Kitman winning the first two and losing the third one. This was originally supposed to be Jeff Jarrett in the triple threat theater, but he got injured around this time, and Bret Hart in the main event was supposed to wrestle Sid for the World Heavyweight Championship, but he had to forfeit the title due to injuries and concussions. So Chris Benoit ended up taking Sid Vicious's place, and everyone knows this is the last pay per view to feature Chris Benoit, because after this pay per view, he would leave. He would leave for WWE the very next day. The very next day. So the Triple Threat Theater, the Triple Threat Theater, and the triple main event of Buff Bagwell, Diamond Dallas Page, last man standing match, Benoit and Sid, and of course Kevin Nash and Terry Funk for control of WCW. These were these were the best and most memorable fights. Other awesome fights include Booker T versus Stevie Ray, brother versus brother match with Booker T defeating Stevie Ray, Tank Abbott and Jerry Flynn in a shoot wrestling MMA style fight, and Big Vito and Johnny the Bull with Inferno taking on Ron and Don, the Harris brothers, with Big Vito and Johnny the Bull defeating them, and Tank Abbott defeating Jerry Lynn, if I didn't say that already. Even the weaker matches, which were and Oklahoma, who was Ed Ferrara from WWE parodying JR, feuding with Medusa in the female division over the Cruiserweight Championship. This was a good fight right here, and a surprisingly good feud. Vampiro defeating David Flair and Crowbar, like I said, awesome fight, but something like this could have been on television. And of course, Brian Knobbs defeating Finley, Norman Smiley, and Ming in a fatal four-way hardcore championship match. So, like I said, awesome pay-per-view, one of the best pay-per-views of all time. This title win, Chris Benoit defeating Sid Vicious here. I like this title win. I like this title win better. His WWE title win was way better because it was at a bigger stage, and he beat two bigger stars in Michaels and Triple H. But I like this better because he fought a tougher challenge in Sid Vicious, and the whole storyline centering around this WCW Chris Benoit was so much better in my opinion than WWE Chris Benoit. I don't know why so many people dump on this title reign. Wrestling is fake, scripted. It's not real. So I don't know how one title reign is better than how one title reign is good and one is not so good. Wrestling isn't real, and both were the same. It ain't like he actually wrestled and won either one. The storyline said both times that you would win, and he won, and the circumstances of him winning the championship were the same. He won the title because the top guys in WCW were forced to take a vacation, and in WWE, Triple H knew Chris Benoit could never take his spot, so of course he let Chris Benoit beat him at WrestleMania, as Kurt Angle said in one interview. So that was Sold Out 2000. Next pay-per-view is Super Brawl 2000, which this pay-per-view is one of my all-time favorite pay-per-views because unlike Sold Out 2000, which I just saw in its entirety 8 years ago in 2010, this pay-per-view right here, Super Brawl 2000, I actually saw this when it aired on pay-per-view. So this pay-per-view will always have a place in my heart. But this pay-per-view right here is widely considered to be one of the worst pay-per-views of 2000. Most of the reviews I've seen of this pay-per-view are absolutely abysmal. But this is one of my all-time favorite pay-per-views. Now, because they lost a lot of names like Chris Benoit, Shane Douglas, who would later return, Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko, Bret the Hitman Hart. This event kinda suffered, and Kevin Sullivan had recently regained power in WCW around this time, and went back and went back to pushing the older wrestlers. Went back to pushing the older wrestlers. While this didn't have a good card, a strong card like the previous pay per view did, and the next one after this did. This was still a pretty good show with the title matches: Kidman and Vampiro, Flair and Terry Funk, and Hogan and the total package, and Big T and Booker T, in my opinion. Oh yeah, and the Wall and Demon being the best fights of the night. Let's see. 8 out of the 11 8 out of the 11 fights on this show were the best. You started the show off with the artist formerly known as Prince Ikea defeating Lash LaRue for the Cruiserweight Championship. Then you had the Wall defeating the Demon, aka Dale Torborg, which was part of a deal between Eric Bischoff and Gene Simmons of the rock band, the leader of the rock band Kiss, where the Kiss surrendered the Kiss let WCW have the rights to the character as long as they featured the Demon in a main event. Of course, Eric Bischoff lost power, so the Wall, so the Wall, the Demon ended up facing the Wall in a special main event at this pay-per-view. Always love this fight because this is the ultimate WrestleMania style match. You got a rock star Kiss Demon fighting a guy in a suit with a bodyguard gimmick. So Wall defeats Demon with a choke slam. Then Big T versus Booker T. Ahmed Johnson's weight had got way too big when he came to WCW, but in my opinion, Booker T, since he controlled and handled most of the offense and led this match, in my opinion, still led Big T to an awesome match. And I loved the end where Swole, where 4x4, I think that's his name, from the Masterpiece No Limit Soldier, interfered and gave Booker T a sidewalk slam. Then of course, Billy Kidman defeated Vampiro in the best wrestling match on this show. Best wrestling match on this show. They both of these guys had a lot of awesome matches in 2000. The Mamalukes Vito and Johnny the Bull defeated David Flair and Crowbar in the Sicilian Stretcher match. Despite the weird gimmick, this was another awesome fight. Then your triple main event: Flair defeating Terry Funk in a Texas death match. These two old men in 2000 tearing the house down. Hogan defeating the Total Package in an awesome fight. Now this wasn't as technical as their previous two bouts, but this was an awesome fight, and the fans were the loudest for these three matches right here. And I love the end where Sting came to the rescue to his former enemy and rival Hulk Hogan to defend him from a assault from to defend him from an assault from the Total Package and Flair, Sting's former friends and rivals at the time. And Sid Vicious taking on Scott Hall and Jeff Jarrett with the Harris brothers in a three-way dance for the World Heavyweight Championship. Despite being a 7+ minute main event, this was an awesome fight with Scott Hall being the MVP of this fight because he controlled most of the offense. And I love the overbooking, the amounts of interferences. Rowdy Piper, referee Slick Johnson, everyone got involved. The match, one of the more hilarious parts of the match. The match even started as Michael Buffer was still announcing Sid Vicious, and just the story and psychology that was told in this short 7+ minute main event. Wish it was given more time. But this was also Scott Hall's last appearance in WCW because of his drug problems, and he will later be released in September of that year. So one of the best pay-per-views ever. Even the other matches, which could have been left off this card, that was Brian Knobbs and Bam Bam Bigelow for the Hardcore Championship. Brian Knobbs defeating Bam Bam Bigelow. 3 count. Moore, Courageous, and Helms defeating Norman Smiley in a handicap match. And another favorite of mine was MMA fighter Tank Abbott fighting Big Al, a guy from the UFC, not the other big Al Green guy who was the dog and part of the Master Blasters. No, this was Tank Abbott fighting a guy from the UFC in a leather jacket on a pole match. To this day, not much is known about the other Big Al. Every time, if you look him up, they're gonna give you the other Al Green, who was part of the Master Blasters and was the dog around this time. So yeah, another awesome pay per view. Then of course the next pay per view was Uncensored 2000, one of the best pay per views. This pay per view was way better than Super Brawl in my opinion, and alongside Sold Out, I consider it one of the best shows of 2000. First off, the arena. I love the very different sets of arenas and Titantrons WCW had during this period. That was one of the things I always loved about WCW. They made WWE and other promotions, WWE especially, just look totally minor league. But let's get to this awesome show right here. Um, every match was awesome. This had a much better card than the last show. La, than the last show. Even the once again, even the terrible matches, even the terrible matches were good. So yeah, the best fights were everything. The best fights were everything, with the exception of the hardcore match between Brian Knobs and three count, three count. But everything was good. The show started off with the artist, formerly known as Prince Ikea, defeating Psychosis and Juventud, defeating Psychosis with Juventud Guerrero. This pay per view is best remembered for the debut of Chris Candido, the late Chris Candido, who provided commentary. Norman Smiley and the Demon defeating Lenny and Lane, defeating Lenny and Lane, or Lane and Rave, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, love Norman Smiley dressed as a demon in this fight, and of course Bam Bam Bigelow defeating the Wall by disqualification. Of course, Brian Knobs and three count. Like I said, this was the worst match of the night. Wasn't a bad match by any means, but why was this on a pay per view? Why was this on a pay per view? Anyway, this was an awesome hardcore match. So these four guys in this fight showed they were worthy of a pay per view spot, despite the fact their match could have been on Nitro or Thunder. One of my favorite matches from this card, and that was Kidman and Booker T defeating Harlem Heat 2000 of Big T and Stevie Ray with Cash and Biggs. Vampiro and defeating Finley in a brutal stiff Falls Count Anywhere match. This is widely considered the best match on this pay per view. And I love Vampiro's monster push during this period. I wish it would have continued with this. The Harris brothers, Ron and Don, defeating the Mamluks, Big Vito and Johnny the Bull, who Big Vito and Johnny the Bull, they were tweeners during this period. They were sometimes heels, but against people like the Harris brothers, they were sometimes baby faces. Dustin Rhodes defeated Terry Funk in a pretty good bull rope match. Sting defeating the Total Package in an awesome lumberjack match. Sid Vicious defeating Jeff Jarrett in one of Sid's other better matches during this period. And Hulk Hogan defeating Ric Flair in the hilariously bad Yapapati Indian strap match. Now, there was nothing really wrong with the match itself other than Ric Flair and Hogan, I think, messing up the finish one time. But the but every time they hit each other with the strap match or touch the turnbuckle, they would always say "Y'all buddy," um, and it was just stupid and hilarious. So awesome fight, but really stupid and gimmicky stipulation. But one of my favorite pay-per-views of 2000. Well, this wraps up the NWO 2000 era, because the next era, as you can see by the title above, this was when Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo both made their returns to WCW and relaunched WCW with a brand new feud. They stripped every one of the titles and started everything over, and they created a new storyline called the Millionaires Club versus the New Blood, with the Millionaires Club being made up of 40 plus and older stars, and the New Blood being all young stars who were held down by veterans. I love this storyline. I consider it one of the best and most underrated storylines of all time. And it would have been better if certain people if certain people like Goldberg would have cooperated, and if and this storyline really needed Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Saturn, and Malenko, who had unfortunately left for WWE. There was one feud with Billy Kidman feud with Hogan, which was considered the worst feud of this year. But this feud, Billy Kidman did the best he could, but it should have been someone other than him. It should have been Benoit, Malenko, Guerrero, and Saturn, who could believably take on who were big enough and believably could take on Hulk Hogan, but they were gone during this period. I also hate the fact that Bret Hart was still recuperating from injuries and would later have to retire from wrestling because of those injuries. Couldn't be part of this storyline because I wish he would have stayed as top heel from WCW 2000, feuding with Benoit and everyone. Then finally, when this storyline rolled around, he would turn face and defend WCW as one of the top baby faces. But right when Bret Hart's WCW career was getting good, he got injured. So, but let's continue with this storyline. And I love all five pay-per-views. All five pay-per-views with Spring Stampede, Slamboree, Bash at the Beach, Great American Bash, being the best. This lasted all the way up until New Blood Rising, which by the time New Blood Rising would happen, this whole storyline right here would be dropped. But that's what I'm gonna cover in this video right here. In this video right here. This pay-per-view was awesome. This pay-per-view had two world title tournaments, one featuring the United States Championship and another featuring the tag team championship. An awesome six-way cruiserweight match between Candido, Artis, Juventud, Shannon Moore, Lash LaRue, and Crowbar. A hilarious hardcore match between Terry Funk and Norman Smiley. And an awesome opener with Ric Flair in street clothes and the total package taking on the Harris brothers and the Mamalukes, Johnny the Bull and Big Vito in a handicap match. This pay-per-view is also best remembered for the main event, which featured Jeff Jarrett defeating Diamond Dallas Page, with Kimberly Page turning on DDP and Jeff Jarrett fulfilling his destiny of finally becoming World Heavyweight Champion. Even though he was a heel at the time, it was still an awesome feel good moment. Even though he was the heel, and I hated seeing Diamond Dallas Page get screwed, but she had an awesome card. Let's start off with the United States tournament. You had Steiner defeating The Wall by disqualification, Mike Awesome defeating Ernest the Cat Miller, then Sting defeating Booker T, then Scott Steiner defeating Mike Awesome, then Sting defeating Vampiro by submission, then Steiner later defeating Sting when Vampiro in retaliation dragged Sting under the ring, setting up their feud, Scott Steiner became the new United States champion and was a tweener during this period. Shane Douglas and Buff Bagwell defeated Harlem Heat 2000, Stevie Ray and Big T. Yeah, there was also a fight between Mancow with Al Roker, Turd the Bartender, and the Freak taking on Jimmy Hart, which I don't remember any part of this, but it was fairly entertaining. My favorite part was Billy Kidman coming out of nowhere and beating the crap out of Jimmy Hart after it was over. Yeah, an awesome pay-per-view here, one of the best of 2000. Next is Slamboree 2000, which this pay-per-view is best remembered for the main event, the triple cage match between Jeff Jarrett taking on David Arquette and Diamond Dallas Page, with the triple cage from the Ready to Rumble movie, which was an awesome movie and one of my all-time favorite movies, despite the majority critical to negative average reception. One of my all-time favorite. I consider it one of the best professional wrestling movies, and way better than the awesome but highly overrated The Wrestler movie starring Mickey Rourke. It led to one of my all-time favorite and infamous storylines, and that was David Arquette on one of the Thunders before this pay-per-view winning the World Heavyweight Championship. So that was an awesome main event with the triple cage. You have one You have one giant cage at the bottom, another medium-sized cage in the middle, and a small cage with guitars in it at the top. At the top, with the belt being hung, over it. You also had a pretty good mid card with Candido taking on the Artist for the Cruiserweight Championship. Apart from one missed spot, an awesome fight. Terry Funk defeating Norman Smiley and Ralphus in a hilariously intense hardcore match. Sean Stasiak defeating Kurt Hennig in a pretty good passing of the torch match. Scott Steiner defeating Captain Huge, Captain Huge, Captain Hughie Erection Bill DeMott for the United States Championship. Another awesome storyline during this period was Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff firing several wrestlers from WCW, and then returning as a new Army inspired group called Misfits in Action. That was Hugh Morris, who was Captain Hughie Erection, Chavo Guerrero, who was Lieutenant Loco, Lash LaRue, Corporal Cajun, and The Wall turning face for the first time in his career, becoming Sergeant AWOL. Van Hammer was also briefly part of this group before leaving as I think he was Private Stash, something like that. So an awesome stable. Steiner defeated him in a pretty good United States title match. Mike Awesome and Canyon wrestled to a no contest. The Total Package defeated Buff Bagwell. Shane Douglas defeated Ric Flair. Sting defeated Vampiro. Hulk Hogan defeated Billy Kidman in what was widely considered one of the worst matches of this year. But Billy Kidman, in my opinion, did good. But once again, it should have been someone else, like Benoit, Saturn, and Malenko, or Guerrero. It should have been those guys feuding with Hulk Hogan, feuding and wrestling with him. They were much bigger and much more believable when it came to facing him. And of course, Jeff Jarrett, and of course the main event, which had David Arquette turning on DDP, revealing that this whole storyline, which everyone complains about, was one big swerve, But I'll talk about Arquette winning the title in another WCW 2000 video, my year-end review of that, which I'll finish as soon as I get done watching all the Nitros and Thunders from this period and compiling up all the best moments. But Jeff Jarrett defeating these guys. An awesome pay-per-view. Didn't have the strong card that Spring Stampede did, but another awesome pay-per-view. Now it's time for the Great American Bash 2000, which this pay-per-view was best remembered for the main event, which featured Jeff Jarrett taking on and defeating Kevin Nash after Goldberg interfered and pretended to help Kevin Nash, but instead chose to spear him, turning heel for the first time in his career and joining the New Blood after it was over. I also love the undercard on this event with Chronic defeating the Mamalukes, Mike Awesome defeating Diamond Dallas Page, G.I. Bro, one of Booker T's earlier gimmicks, defeating Sean Stasiak in a boot camp match with both of these guys wearing army fatigue and face paint. Shane Douglas defeating The Wall in an awesome tables match. Scott Steiner defeating Steiner and Abbott in a handicap asylum match. Ric Flair defeating David Flair. Vampiro defeating Sting in another memorable match from this period. That was the Human Torch match. But like I said, this is best remembered for the end. Goldberg joining the New Blood. Bash at the Beach 2000, one of the biggest shows of this year because of what happened in the main events of this show. This show is best remembered for Hollywood Hulk Hogan taking on Jeff Jarrett, but as soon as the match starts, Jeff Jarrett lies down in the ring and Hulk Hogan cuts the infamous promo on Russo saying, "Is this your idea of a joke, Russo? This is why the company is in the damn shape it's in. It's because of bullshit like this right here." And then Vince Russo comes out and publicly fires Hulk Hogan, and this will be Hulk Hogan's final appearance in World Championship Wrestling, and one of the most bizarre and coolest moments after Hulk Hogan was fired, Vince Russo would come out and promptly announce mid-carder Booker T, who had already wrestled that night, as the new number one contender for Jeff Jarrett's World Heavyweight Champion, and Booker T would go on to defeat Jeff Jarrett to become the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. That's what this pay-per-view is best remembered for. And I remember watching this as a kid, and just being in shock at what happened and not really understanding what the whole Jeff Jarrett, Hogan, Vince Russo controversy was. And to this day, I understand it much better now, but there's some parts I still don't understand. I still don't understand like what was real and what was fake, but I like how it led to my favorite storyline, the main event rise of Booker T. The main event, one of my favorite things of WCW 2000. So when we talk about awesome stuff in 2000, one of them was Booker T's rise to main event status. Um, 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 and of course the undercard was pretty good too. The undercard was pretty good too. With one of the other big matches from this card was Goldberg taking on Kevin Nash, a singles taking on Kevin Nash for Scott Hall's contract. If Nash won, Scott Hall would have his contract renewed. If Goldberg won, Scott Hall's contract would be terminated. After this was also when Steiner, who was a tweener up until this point, turned heel by knocking out Goldberg, by knocking out Kevin Nash as he was about to win the fight, and thus tore up Scott Hall's contract. And this was also the beginning of Scott Steiner's loose cannon gimmick and his big monster push and dominant heel run in WCW, which would dominate the rest of WCW from late 2000 and early 2001. It would even continue into the next promotion, the successor, World Wrestling All Stars. Next pay-per-view, New Blood Rising. Another awesome pay-per-view. Not as good as the other four from this era, but a pretty good pay-per-view. This is also widely considered one of the worst pay-per-views of this year, but this was a pretty good pretty good show. Lots of awesome matches. The only thing that really stands out, the only thing that was really memorable, there were only two things that were real memorable about this event. One was Lance Storm defeating Mike Awesome in a Canadian Rules match for the United States Championship. Sting's feud with the Demon. Let's go back to Storm and Mike Awesome with Mike Awesome defeating Lance Storm in several matches, but they kept changing the rules throughout to suit the heel Lance Storm. And when Lance Storm beat Mike Awesome, Bret Hart came out to congratulate him after it was over. The triple threat match between Kevin Nash and Goldberg and Scott Steiner, where they tried to do some work shoot stuff, where Goldberg, one of the more bizarre moments and hilarious moments now when I watch, hilariously bad moments now when I watch, when Goldberg for some reason says screw this and just immediately left the match, with WCW pretty much telling the audience that wrestling was fake. But I didn't understand it as a kid. As an adult, when I watched this, I laughed. Yeah, this is one of the many things I didn't like. This is one of the things I didn't like about WCW and WWE. WWE especially was this work stuff where they would try to sell this moment to you as real, but it would be like, okay, this is real, but everything before that was supposed to be fake. Get out of here. But yeah, and of course Booker T defeating Jeff Jarrett, retaining his World Heavyweight Championship. Those are the only things that were memorable about this show. Memorable about this show right here. So pretty good show, but not as good as the other four pay-per-views from this period. And this is the last show of the Millionaires Club new blood feud, because Eric Bischoff would clash with Vince Russo, and both of them and Eric Bischoff would later leave WCW, and WCW would go back to normal with with completely young guys, similar to Extreme Championship Wrestling at the time. That good guys, the old people are good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys are and the young people are bad guys. That would be completely abolished, and everything would pretty much go back to normal, with Scott Steiner being the top dominant heel for the rest of 2000 and early 2001, and like I said, even into the next pay-per-view. So we get to one of the best pay-per-views from this period, Fall Brawl 2000. And like I said, right here, this was my opinion, was WCW in late 2000 was the best. Was the best. WCW in late 2000 and early 2001 was the best. Sucks. Right when they were starting to improve, right when they finally got it right, Jamie Kellner, I think that's his name, pulled the plug on him and eliminated him from what's his name, and Eric Bischoff, who could have repurchased WCW, didn't want to purchase it as if he didn't, because if he didn't have a network that wanted to carry it. So yeah, with I think Fall Brawl, Halloween Havoc, and Mayhem were the best. Mayhem, Sin, Super Brawl, and Greed were the best pay-per-views during this period. Let's start off with Fall Brawl, which is widely by most critics during this time considered the best pay-per-view during this period. Yet an awesome stud stat card with the most memorable fights being Steiner and Goldberg, with Steiner defeating Goldberg in a no disqualification match. This would make Steiner the number one contender after defeating Goldberg, and would start his dominant run as top heel of WCW. And Booker T defeating Kevin Nash in the cage heat match for the World Heavyweight Championship, and the memorable elimination match between the Filthy Animals, Disco Inferno, Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, Conan, Big Vito, Paul Orndorff, taking on the natural born thrillers of Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Haire, Mike Sanders, Chuck Palumbo, Stasiak Renault, and Johnny the Bull. In a no contest. Also, other awesome fights from this pay-per-view were Skipper defeating Kiwi in the opener for the Cruiserweight Championship, Misfits, Capro Corrigan, Lieutenant Loco, and AWOL defeating 3 Count and Shannon Moore. And I'll talk about more of that later. I just want to talk about the big matches. But yeah. So yeah, next pay per view was Halloween Havoc 2000. Halloween Havoc 2000. This right here is widely considered to be the worst show, one of the worst shows WCW produced, and it was the worst show of 2000, as Dave Meltzer and Wrestling Observer rated this show as 2000. And most of the matches, and most of the reviews here on YouTube are abysmal. I remember watching this show when I was younger. However, I remember bits and pieces from this show, like the main event, the triple main events between Jarrett and Sting, Booker T defeating Steiner by disqualification, and Goldberg defeating Chronic in a handicap match, and an undercard match featuring Mike Sanders taking on and defeating Ernest the Cat Miller in a hilarious kickboxing match on a pay-per-view. After watching this pay-per-view again, I'm in the minority here. I think this is one of the best pay-per-views I've seen. I think the biggest problem with this pay-per-view, because it's not the wrestling. The biggest problem with this pay-per-view is this pay-per-view feels like a Nitro and Thunder. Only 2 of the main events, that was Jarrett and Sting and Booker T and Steiner, were worthy of being on a pay-per-view. Everything else on this card could have been on a Nitro or Thunder. So I think that's the problem people and Dave Meltzer had with this pay-per-view at the time. Because this is far from a bad pay-per-view. I have seen way worse than this pay-per-view right here. And the show from beginning to end was awesome. The only problem is, like I said, several matches could have been on the show. Like one match which was one of the worst matches on this card, was Buff Bagwell and David Flair. First Blood DNA match. Something like that. Where they were doing a storyline where David Flair was running around attacking people, where Stacy Keibler was supposedly pregnant, and she was running around attacking people. And David Flair was running around attacking people, and trying to get the person's DNA. Man, it was just stupid. Then the main event of Goldberg defeating Chronic in a handicap match main event on a pay-per-view. So I love the Ernest the Cat Miller and Mike Sanders kickboxing match, but could not have been on a Nitro and Thunder. Love it when they do fixed boxing kickboxing and MMA style fights and amateur wrestling in pro wrestling. Yeah, let's get to the next pay per view. Gonna skip the German only pay per view of Millennium Final because the only match I remember is Mike Awesome winning a battle royal in the main event of Sting and Kevin Nash. I will review this event in its entirety if I ever find it. If I ever find it again, it used to be on YouTube. It got removed, and I haven't seen it in like 6 years and barely remember it. So this will be skipped. Next pay per view is one of the best pay per views of 2000, Mayhem. Mayhem in 99 and 2000, Mayhem replaced the Road Wild / Hog Wild event that WCW had from 96 to 99. 96, no. This replaced the, not the Hog Wild, the World War III event. New Blood Rising replaced the Hog Wild event they had from Hog Wild event they had from 96 to 99. This replaced the World War III pay-per-view, WCW's Royal Rumble, and this was a phenomenal stat card from beginning to end. From beginning to end with the four-part main event series, and the first three matches, being the best and most memorable, with Jeff Jarrett taking on Buff Bagwell, the Insiders, Diamond Ellis Page and Kevin Nash taking on the perfect event of Palumbo and Stasiak, Goldberg taking on and defeating Luger in one of their very first encounters, and Scott Steiner defeating Booker T in a memorable and brutal straitjacket match to finally become World Heavyweight Champion. I remember being so mad Booker T lost this, and I still root for Booker T now whenever I watch this. Match, and this will begin Scott Steiner's dominant heel run, where he would face and defeat all the top baby faces WCW had. Had all the way up until the final Nitro, where Booker T returned to defeat Scott Steiner and take the world title with him to WWE. And the opener, which had 3 counts, Shane Helms, Moore, Courageous, and Noble taking on the Jun Dragons, Kaz Hayashi, and Yang, in an awesome triple threat match, and Sanders taking on Kiwi for the Cruiserweight Championship. Also Crowbar in a 3-way fight for the Hardcore title, taking on Big Vito and defeating Big Vito and Reno with 3 count, defeating Jun Dragons, Hayashi and Yang, and Mancal and Jimmy Hart had another fight on this pay-per-view. But I'll talk about more about that later. Next pay-per-view was Starrcade 2000, which this pay-per-view, in my opinion, it wasn't as good as Fall Brawl, Halloween Havoc, and Mayhem, but this was a pretty good pay-per-view. Two of the things that hurt this event, in my opinion, two of the things. The first were the absences of Booker T and Sting. The second was WCW had lost a lot of money around this time, so they had to book more shows closer to. They had to book smaller arenas, and this show had the same set and Titantron as Nitro and Thunder during this period. Yes, all the previous pay-per-views, which had creative and elaborate setups and designs, this one had the same one as Nitro and Thunder, making it look like a glorified episode of Nitro and Thunder. But this had a lot of awesome wrestling, with the most memorable fights once again being the opener and the 3-part main event. The opener had 3 counts. Shane Helms, Shannon Moore defeating the Jun Dragons, Kaz Hayashi, Yang, and Evan Courageous and Noble in a tag team ladder match to determine the number 1 contender for the Cruiserweight Championship match. The 3-part main event, which featured the Insiders again, Diamond Ellis Page and Kevin Nash, who, if I didn't mention it already, the Natural Born Thrillers later turned on Kevin Nash. I would also list Kevin Nash as one of the top heels of 2000, but he kind of went back and forth. From heel to babyface, and after after his what was it second run as a heel during this period, he would turn face once more when the Natural Born Thrillers turned on and beat him up on an episode of Thunder or Nitro. I can't remember. Can't remember. Taking the Insiders, Diamond Dallas Page and Kevin Nash taking on the Perfect Event, Chuck Palumbo and Sean Stasiak. Goldberg defeating Lex Luger in a no holds barred match where Buff Bagwell would come back in turn and pretend to help Goldberg, but would turn up, but with aid Luger during this fight. Goldberg still managed to defeat him though, and Scott Steiner defeating Sid Vicious after a huge absence. Sid Vicious was one of the major stars of 2000, but wasn't there. Wasn't there. He was also one of the top baby faces, but wasn't there for most of 2000. He came back in late 2000 and in one of his best fights during this period. Scott Steiner defeated Sid Vicious by submission. So like I said, not as good as the other pay-per-views, and not as good as the other three pay-per-views that came before it, and the other three that would come after this, but it's still a pretty good pay-per-view. Next is WCW. Next is the last of WCW. WCW Sin, Super Brawl Revenge, and the final one, Greed. Around this time, this is where Ric Flair would turn heel by screwing Sid in the main event. By screwing Sid and aiding Steiner in the main event, they would create a brand new stable called the Magnificent Seven, consisting of Flair himself, Steiner, Rick Steiner, Buff Bagwell, Luger, Road Warrior Animal, and Jeff Jarrett. And this heel stable would run roughshod and would dominate WCW for the next 3 months with Kevin Nash, Diamond Dallas Page, Booker T, Dustin Rhodes, and Dusty Rhodes as top baby faces during this period. I didn't mention this in the 2000s portion, but in October, Vince Russo, in August or October, Vince Russo would be relieved of his duties. As Booker of WCW, and in an attempt to reboot WCW, they would appoint John Laurinaitis as top booker for WCW, and WCW would see a huge increase in product. Even critics who were hard on WCW during this time period would praise John Laurinaitis' booking, including booking a big-time United States tournament match on one of the editions of Nitro. Also around this time, Mike Awesome, who would, after a huge babyface run in late 2000, would turn heel and join Team Canada with Storm and Skipper, and they would feud with the Filthy Animals. The Misfits in action would slowly end when first Chavo Guerrero leaves the group, and AWOL turns on Bill DeMott, Hugh Morris, and of course Hugh Morris and Lash LaRue later go their separate ways. And of course Vito would feud with Reno, who is supposed to be his storyline brother during this period. The Natural Born Thrillers would also break up with Mike Sanders becoming a protege of Flair. Stasiak later forming a Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Hare turning face, and Stasiak briefly teaming with Jindrak with Stasiak, of course, later being spun off into a feud with Bam Bam Bigelow, and Shane Douglas would feud with Hugh Morris, and later would tease a face turn before WCW going out of business, where Shane Douglas would feud with General Rection. Then he aided Rection in a match with Rick Steiner, who Rick Steiner briefly returned as a babyface, but quickly turned heel and joined the Magnificent Seven with his brother. So yeah. But let's start off with the very first pay-per-view, and that was Sin. A phenomenal show. This had a much bigger set design than Starrcade 2000, and it had a phenomenal. And it had a phenomenal. It had a phenomenal. It had a phenomenal card with the main event being the most memorable. With the main event being the most memorable. With the um four-part main event, with the four-part main event and the first three matches being the most memorable. Let's start off with the first three matches. Chavo Guerrero defeating Shane Helms in a memorable cruiserweight, in an awesome cruiserweight match to start the show. Renault defeating Big Vito in a stiff big man match. The Jun Dragons, Hayashi and Yang defeated Evan Courageous and Jamie Noble in an awesome tag team cruiserweight style match. Ernest the Cat Miller in defeating Mike Sanders in an awesome fight. One thing I love, the crowd, they were into everything in this fight at this pay-per-view. Then, of course, the four-part main event, the Natural Born Thrillers, Palumbo and O'Hare with Sanders defeating the Insiders, Diamond Dallas Page and Kevin Nash for the Tag Team Championships. Shane Douglas defeating General Erection in a First Blood chain match for the United States title. Totally Buff defeating Luger and Bagwell, defeating Goldberg and Dwayne Bruce, the trainer of the power plant, with the stipulation being if Goldberg lost and he did, he would be banished from WCW, and he was banished from the remainder of WCW. And Scott Steiner defeating Jeff Jarrett, Sid Vicious, and Road Warrior Animal after Sid Vicious first injured his leg in an infamous spot where Sid tried a drop kick on Steiner and brutally messed up his leg, which would take him out all the way up until I think 2004. He would later return in the next promotion, World Wrestling All Stars, as commissioner, but he wouldn't return to wrestling until 2004. And um, what's his face? Ric Flair screwed Steiner. Ric Flair screwed Sid Vicious and turned heel at this event, which is why this event was appropriately named Sid, because it was signaling his heel turn. Next pay-per-view was Super Brawl Revenge, which this didn't have as good of a card as Sin did, but this was still an awesome pay-per-view with a lot of awesome matches. Um, Besides the opener, the last three matches, which were Kanyon defeating Diamond Dallas Page, then Diamond Dallas Page back to back defeating Jarrett, Steiner, and Steiner defeating Kevin Nash in his final appearance with WCW. WCW being the most memorable matches. Other great matches had Sean O'Hare and Chuck Palumbo defeating Mark Jindrak and Stasiak for the Cruiserweight Championships. Chavo Guerrero wrestling and defeating Mysterio for the Cruiserweight Championship, and Rick Steiner defeating Dustin Rhodes for the United States Championship, and Hugh Morris wrestling the Wall. So another awesome wrestling and defeating the Wall. So another awesome pay-per-view. Now the last pay-per-view, appropriately named Greed 2001, which was an awesome pay-per-view. This was the final pay-per-view WCW produced before their acquisition by Ted Turner, by not Ted Turner, but Vince McMahon and WWE just weeks later. I recently got to see all the matches from this event 5 years ago, and still remember just about everything. With the most memorable being the opener with Jason Jett debuting and defeating Kiwi. The three-part main event of Booker T defeating Rick Steiner for the United States Championship, returning to defeat Steiner for the United States Championship, and Dustin and Dusty Rhodes defeating Flair and Jarrett, and Scott Steiner defeating Diamond Dallas Page by submission in a Falls Count Anywhere match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Another memorable match was the Natural Born Thrillers, Palumbo and O'Hare defeating Totally Buff, Lex Luger and Bagwell in 54 seconds. To this day, I'm actually surprised Bagwell and Luger agreed to do that, because both those guys, especially in WCW where they were veterans, are known to be hard to work with. But yeah, an awesome pay-per-view. Once again, a much better card than Super Brawl, but not a strong card like Sin, but an awesome pay-per-view. And this would be the last pay-per-view WCW produced. The storyline during this period would have had Scott Steiner defeating everyone, with Goldberg finally coming to defeat him and disband the Magnificent Seven, but WCW would later go out of business. So instead, Booker T, under WWE's booking for the final show of WCW show of 2000, would defeat Scott Steiner and take the world title and the United States title with him to the WWE, to the WWE, with Scott Steiner being the last major WCW contracted wrestler for World Championship Wrestling, and him, Flair, Hall, Nash, and Sting would wait out the rest of their contracts by Time Warner, and Sting would not debut until 2015, and Steiner and Hall and them would come in 2002. So yeah, that ends WCW 2000. I will be reviewing each of these events more indefinitely separately. I probably won't review Sin, Super Brawl, and Green and Millennium Finals. I can't find these shows in their entirety. But I probably will because I do remember them. But I can't find those shows in entirety, so there will not be any links in the description box below when I review those shows. All right. And unlike this video right here, my individual 2000 pay-per-view WCW reviews, they will not be in order. They will not be in order, unlike this right here. So with that being said, I am done for now, people. I'll see you guys later.